Hey, I'm DJ and today I'm going to show you how I made this 4-foot cedar sign. Doing a sign this big is always a little bit difficult, especially when it's bigger than the bed of the CNC. But in this video I'm going to show you how I tiled this into multiple carves, mess it up a little bit, and then finish it strong. So the first thing I had to do was make sure that I had a straight edge on all of these cedar planks. And I don't have a joiner, so I use my little joining jig, give me a straight edge, and then I put the fence back on the table saw to rip them down to width. And because this glue up is so wide, I wanted to use clamping cauls, so you'll see these little pieces of wood that are underneath the glue up right now, and then I'm getting ready to set up on the other one. I essentially just have a little hole through there that I stick a clamp, and that just ensures that the entire glue up stays flat. So I put slight pressure on the cauls, clamp on it with my long Harbor Freight clamps, which work okay, not the greatest. And then I clamp down the cauls all the way to keep it flat. Once it's done, I pull it off, and then here I'm gonna go through and sand down my glue lines and just make sure I get all of that glue off of there. Once I'm done there, then I'm gonna spray off all the excess air and see where I have little pits. And I'm gonna come back with Starbond CA glue in black. And once this seeps in, I hit it with the accelerator. It's instantly dry. Water popped the grain, so I only have to sand once. I'm going to flip it over while that's drying out. And on the back side, I opted to go with epoxy to keep the knots a little bit more secure. And once I have all that sanded down, this piece was a little bit too big to use my crosscut table saw sled. And I didn't have a track saw at the time of this video, so I put it up on the CNC, squared it up, and use the CNC to cut down on one side. It definitely takes a little bit longer, but it ensures that I have a clean edge that is square. And then I'm going to flip it around and do the same thing to the other side. Once that's done, I'm ready to throw on my first coat of finish. I'm using a water-based polyacrylic here because that's what the customer wanted. I brush it on, sand it down to 220, and then I'm ready to apply my stencil. In this case, I'm just using contact paper from Lowe's. I cut it to size, flip it over, and then one thing that you really have to be careful about is not getting too many air bubbles in it. It's especially difficult with a big piece like this. So once I get it on, I'm going to use my razor blade and go through and poke some holes, squeeze out air bubbles. Once it's on to size, this is probably the most satisfying part, is cutting off the excess using a razor. It's something you gotta be careful about when you're doing, but as long as you keep good pressure, you really just need one hand. Make sure you're not cutting into the wood, and it gives you a nice, flush stencil that's ready to carve. Now, since I'm doing a tiled carve on this, I want to make sure that my piece stays square to the work surface of the CNC, so I figured might as well add a little fence to the CNC. So in this scene, I am using a pocket tool path just to cut out a 3/4 wide inch strip, and then I'm going to take a piece of MDF, cut it to 3/4 inches, and go ahead and just drill some holes in there, use the bolts that I use for my clamps, and clamp that down. And you'll notice in the next scene that those black bolts I was using were a little bit too big, so I just went ahead with normal nuts, tighten those down. And then it's always interesting figuring out how to clamp it once I have this fence installed, as you can kind of see. So my first carve, I am zeroing off of the center of the overall piece to ensure that I get equal spacing all around. So I start with the middle, and you'll see I'll carve middle, bottom, and then top. And what I'm doing here is what Carve Create calls a advanced V carve. So I'm going to use a 90-degree V to go and get all of my details first, and there's some extensive details on this part, and then I'll come back with a 1/8 inch flat end mill to pocket out all of the excess piece that's still left in there. Go ahead and give it a watch. Something I'm not a huge fan of, but you can kind of see in this video, is the way that Carve Create creates its tool paths. So there's a lot of moving around in the seemingly random places and carving these little dots, tiny little portions of the advanced V carve, and then going back and actually getting the details. I like using Fusion 360 or a similar software that has much more logical toolpaths. However, they don't have the easily integrated option to create this advanced V carve, where the V carve portion actually uses that V bit to go in and carve out where it's too small for the 1/8 inch flat bit to reach. And you'll see I went in and sprayed off all the excess chips with a little bit of compressed air just to make sure that I'm not getting too much static. And in this case, you saw I pointed at my little bit setter changer thingy and then to my zero plate. And that's because when I installed this fence, it inadvertently interfered with where my little bit changer thing went. So I had to zero it off the top of the workpiece again. Now I go ahead and slide the workpiece up and I'm going to carve the bottom portion this time. And you'll see right off the bat that this carve looks okay, but this lower portion, the border, ended up being a little bit deeper. And I noticed that these letters seemed like a little bit thicker than what I wanted, which was definitely trouble, but once you start carving, there's no going back. So it's something I had to figure out on the fly while I was carving this sign.
Grow hard out what you want to do. Everybody just do your thing.
Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. 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 Yo, set your affirmations, aspirations.
When you do a tiled carve like this, one of the most important parts is finding a zero from the previous carve that is extremely easy to identify. For the most part, I chose sharp corners within these leaves. Now on this carve is where I realized that I messed up a little bit previously. So you'll notice as it carves, this top portion or far right side when the sign is upright is carved shallower and the letters aren't quite as thick. So what I ended up having to do was go back again with another toolpath a little bit deeper to match the left side of the sign, and then after this, in post-processing, I will have to do a little bit of touch-up to make sure that both sides match.
It's like every different season, yo. Sometimes I'm high, other times I'm barely breathing, though. I always try to fight and hide from the demons, yo. Negative thoughts are poison, they rot.
I included this slow-mo despite the flickering lights, just to show that this is what I strive for every time that I have a CNC carve. I'm looking for chips and very, very minimal sawdust. And you can see these tiny little chips coming off even on a V-carve and very little dust.
You show yourself a foundation. Stay away from all the shit that causes temptation. I know that I like to do it cause it's sensation. I live my life in my head like a narration. Don't expect greatness, do my best, man, I'll take it. Wake up, today's gonna be a good day. 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 Wake up, today's gonna be a good day.
So what happened on the left side that caused all these issues is that my CNC disconnected part of the way through a carve. When I restarted it, I must have skipped steps on the Y-axis somehow, but my carve ended up shifting down about 1/10 of an inch. So my left side, the text was much wider than the right. And rather than trying to guess the offset and do the same thing to the right side, I just lowered my Z a little bit, and you'll see that's what caused these lines in between all the letters, and it actually happened on the left side as well. Another issue that I ran into is that it must have been some variation in the height of the stock when it was on the CNC carving, but my border was off completely across all three carves. So I ended up thickening that back up as well, and you will see that in the carves coming up. once my carve was complete, I took the sign off of the CNC and brought it over to my workbench / table saw and used my Nerix chisels to go ahead and get the little portion of the V-carve. Remember how I told you that this carve shifted down about 1/10 of an inch? I went through with the chisel and corrected that. In between this, I lost the footage, but I hit a coat of Lacquer clear before I hit it with this color, and you probably noticed I changed spray cans in the middle of it. Stood the sign up to get these details a little bit better, and now comes the worst and least satisfying stencil peel I have ever had in my entire life. Once I got the stencil completely removed, I was happy to see that there were little to no bleeding at all. However, I still had to go back in with my Rotex sander and correct where I had those little lines in between carves while the CNC was traveling, and the zero was set a little bit too low on the Z-axis. But I was also trying to sand down just enough into the carve to even out all of the carve itself. And you'll notice in the leaves a little bit, I sanded out some of the detail because that carve was so shallow. In retrospect, I should have gone with a 60 or 45 degree V to prevent that, but I broke out the old rotary tool, went through, carved those details back out, and you'll see I went back through, hit a layer of clear lacquer and then black lacquer again, and this time I sanded by hand to make sure that I would not run into any issues with sanding these lines out. Before I started actually finishing the sign, I wanted to make sure that my mounting method was taken care of. I'm going to use some French cleat made out of metal that I got at Lowe's. So I just carved a little pocket here so that it would sit flush, and you'll see that I had to get a little bit creative with my washers. So I need a little bit more thickness to back those screws out. I didn't have short enough screws, so I used some nuts as washers, and it worked out pretty well. You'll have to excuse my appearance here, but this is how easy it is to mount these signs, and it's flush, and it's stable, and it's not going anywhere. So I go back in with my polyacrylic, this time using a spray instead of the brush to get a better finish. And so a couple cycles of spraying, drying, sanding by hand, making sure I'm going parallel with the grain so I don't get any sanding lines. Spraying that off with hair, going back, and finishing. Once all of my finished coats are nice and cured, I go back in with a crumpled up piece of paper bag, usually not paper bag, and polish it up a little bit. And you can see here that finish is looking pretty nice, and for how much trouble I went through for the sign, it ended up looking pretty sweet. I made this sign for Cedar. You can find them on Instagram, and I'll throw a link down in the description below. Check them out for all of your plant-based content.